He walked into her office with nothing but a borrowed tie, a wrinkled resume, and his daughter by his side. What happened next would test not just their courage but her heart. Before we begin, if you believe in the power of kindness, second chances, and stories that stay with you, consider subscribing. Every story here is crafted to move, inspire, and remind us that even quiet moments can change everything. Now, let's begin. Single dad walked into CEO's office with Résumé. One sentence from his daughter made the CEO cry. The revolving doors of Sloane Tower hissed shut behind him, sealing off the noise of the city and replacing it with the hush of climate-controlled air and polished marble. Gabe's boots made soft, uncertain taps against the gleaming floor, each step echoing a truth he could barely admit to himself. He didn't belong here. Beside him, Ellie clutched his hand, her small fingers laced tightly through his. She wore her best dress blue with little white flowers and had insisted on braiding her own hair that morning. There was a smudge of jelly on her sleeve he hadn't noticed until they were halfway across town, and now it mocked him loud as his thudding heartbeat. "Are you sure this is a good idea, sweetheart?" Gabe whispered, lowering his voice as they approached the towering reception desk. His voice cracked from exhaustion, from self-doubt, from the sheer weight of months spent trying to stay afloat. Ellie looked up at him, those steady hazel eyes of hers full of more belief than he could summon for himself. "You promised you'd try," she said simply. And so he nodded because she was right, because sometimes courage came in pigtails and jelly stains. The receptionist didn't hide her skepticism. She was dressed in sharp black like a chess piece stationed to guard the gate. Her eyes flicked from Gabe's work-worn jacket to Ellie's scuffed shoes, her smile polite and brittle. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, already reaching for the clipboard that said, "You don't belong here," in invisible ink. "No," Gabe said. "But I brought a resume. I'm looking for work. Maintenance. I used to be a systems engineer. I heard this company was expanding." The woman's eyebrows arched. "Sir, Ms. Sloane doesn't handle hiring directly. You'll need to go through HR." Then Ellie stepped forward. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper worn at the creases and decorated with glitter stickers around the edges. She placed it gently on the counter, smoothing it with her tiny palm. "I wrote a note," she said. "It's for Mrs. Sloane." The receptionist blinked. Gabe opened his mouth to explain, to apologize, but Ellie was already speaking. "My dad's the smartest person I know," she said clearly. "He used to fix machines that make whole cities run. He only stopped fixing things when my mom died. But now, I think, maybe, if he had a job again, he'd smile more." The words hung in the air like a sudden hush after thunder. The receptionist hesitated. Then without a word, she picked up the note and disappeared through a glass-paneled door. Gabe wanted to scoop Ellie up and leave before security asked them to. But he couldn't move, not when Ellie was standing so still, so brave, like this was all part of some quiet plan she believed in more than anything. Moments passed. 5, 10, the kind of minutes that stretch into eternity when you're waiting for judgment. Then the door opened again. "You, the receptionist," said, her voice different now. "Come with me." Gabe instinctively looked around, sure she meant someone else. But no, her gaze was fixed on him. He cleared his throat. "Just me." "No," the woman said. "Miss Crew, Mint Sloane, wants to see you. Both of you." They were led through a labyrinth of glass and steel, past people in sleek suits holding coffee-like weapons, past hallways that smelled like success and hand sanitizer. Ellie's hand stayed wrapped in his like a lifeline. Then, suddenly, they were in the office. Avery Sloane stood by the window, her silhouette cut against the skyline like a statue carved from ambition. She turned as they entered, her expression unreadable. She was younger than Gabe expected, early 30s maybe, and striking in a way that was less about beauty and more about presence. Everything about her said she made decisions that could change lives before breakfast. "This is your daughter?" she asked. Gabe nodded stiffly. "Ellie. And you're—" "Gabriel Klein. she said, glancing down at the handwritten paper Ellie had delivered. Former systems engineer, currently working nights at Garrison Auto, and looking for something better. Her voice was smooth, precise. Dangerous. Yes, ma'am, Gabe said. I didn't mean to intrude. My daughter thought. He trailed off, the absurdity of it all crashing down on him. Avery turned to Ellie. You wrote this, she asked. Ellie nodded. I didn't know your email. There was a pause. A long one. Then Avery crossed the room and crouched down in front of Ellie so they were eye to eye. You said your dad stopped smiling, she said softly. Why did you bring him here? Ellie shrugged. You're the boss. Bosses can help. Avery stood slowly. She looked at Gabe, and for the first time there was something in her eyes he didn't expect. Not judgment, not superiority. Recognition. She walked behind her desk, then paused before sitting. Mr. Klein, she said. Sit down. It wasn't a suggestion. He sat, heart-pounding. Ellie climbed into the oversized leather chair beside him, legs dangling. Avery studied him for a long moment. Why did you really come here? She asked. Gabe took a breath. Because I used to build systems that made other people's jobs easier, efficient, smart. But after my wife passed, I couldn't think. I took whatever job I could, anything to keep Ellie safe. But now she's watching me settle. I didn't want that to be what she learned. Another silence. Then Avery said, Do you believe you're still capable of more? Gabe hesitated, then answered, Yes. She tapped the glittery paper with one manicured finger. Then I suggest we find out. Gabe stared at her, stunned. You're giving me a chance. He asked, disbelief and relief fighting in his voice. I'm giving Ellie's letter a chance. Avery said, her tone cool, but not cold. Let's see where it leads. Gabe didn't know what to say, but Ellie reached over, took his hand again, and whispered, I told you she'd listen. And for the first time in a long time, Gabe Klein smiled. The elevator ride down was silent except for the faint squeak of Ellie's sneakers against the polished floor. Gabe kept glancing at her reflection in the mirrored panel, still half expecting to wake up. Every inch of him tensed with disbelief, and a flickering sense of danger like joy wasn't allowed to last too long in his life. He wanted to ask Ellie what made her so sure this would work. But deep down, he already knew. She had something he'd lost long ago, unshakable belief in people. In the lobby, they stepped out into the open air. The city hadn't changed, but Gabe had. Something had shifted, however slightly, the moment Avery Sloane had looked him in the eye and said, Let's see where it leads. 3 days later, Gabe returned to Sloane Tower, this time alone. Ellie was in school, a local public elementary where the lunchroom smelled like old apples and the teachers tried their best. He'd packed her a peanut butter sandwich and a napkin she'd insisted on drawing a sun on. So, you don't forget to smile, she'd said. The memory stayed with him as he entered the back corridor of the building where he'd been instructed to meet with the facility's director. The air smelled different here, less like power and glass, more like sweat wires and coffee left too long in the pot. A man in his 50s with a peppered beard and heavy boots was waiting by a storage cage. You, Klein? He asked without looking up from a clipboard. Yes, sir. Sir makes me feel old, the man said, handing him a badge. Name's Wallace. We'll see what you're made of. Gabe didn't argue. He'd been tested before in jobs and grief and survival. He followed Wallace through narrow maintenance corridors and boiler rooms humming with machinery. The building had over 40 floors, state-of-the-art HVAC systems, lighting arrays that could talk to each other, and touchscreen security panels. Gabe recognized half the systems by name. You'd done this kind of work before, Wallace asked as Gabe scanned a misbehaving control panel. Yes, Gabe said, crouching to reset the power interface. Not recently, but this part of my brain never turned off. Wallace grunted. You were an engineer once, weren't you? I was. Why'd you leave? Gabe hesitated. Life changed. That seemed to be answer enough. Wallace didn't press. By the end of the shift, Gabe had repaired 2 malfunctioning thermostats, recalibrated a miswired elevator call button, and quietly reprogrammed a sensor that had baffled the night crew for weeks. Wallace clapped him on the back. "You've got hands and brains. You don't find that much anymore." Gabe half smiled. "I'm just grateful to be useful again." Wallace nodded. "You'll stay on." "Probationary. You report to me, but Monsieur Sloane has final say." At the mention of her name, Gabe's chest tightened. He hadn't seen her again since that first day. It felt surreal, like she'd stepped in for a single act in a play and disappeared before the curtain rose. Still, every tool he picked up, every screw he tightened, it was all done with a quiet determination to prove her right. Not about his resume, about Ellie's. That evening, Gabe picked Ellie up from school. She came running out of the front door's backpack, bouncing cheeks red from the cold. "Well," she asked breathlessly, "did she fire you already?" He chuckled, kneeling down to her height. "Not yet." Ellie grinned. "Told you." On the walk home, she pulled something from her bag, a folded paper with red crayon drawings. "What's this?" Gabe asked. "I made your resume better," she said, "in case they need a new one." Gabe unfolded the page. It read, "My dad fixes everything, carries all the groceries, makes pancakes with faces, hugs like a champion, still loves even when he's sad. Please hire him forever." There was a picture of a man with big arms, a little girl holding his hand, and a tall woman in a pointy blazer all standing under a rainbow. "She said yes because of you. You know," Gabe said quietly. Ellie shrugged. "Maybe. But she'll keep saying yes if you show her the rest." The next day, something unexpected happened. As Gabe was checking the water pressure valves on the 31st floor, his radio buzzed. "Facilities, this is front desk. Mr. Klein, Miss Sloane request your presence in her office." His hand froze on the valve. He wasn't afraid, exactly, just unsteady. You didn't get summoned by someone like Avery Sloane without it meaning something big. Or something bad. When he arrived, the receptionist gave him a respectful nod and gestured toward the executive elevator. The ride up was longer than he remembered. When the doors opened, her assistant greeted him with a smile. "She's waiting." Inside, the office looked the same: glass walls, skyline views, minimalist furniture that cost more than his old pickup. But Avery Sloane was different. She stood by the bookshelf holding a file. When she turned, there was something softer in her posture, still composed, still powerful, but human. "Mr. Klein," she said, "I reviewed your performance notes." Gabe nodded, unsure what to say. "I also spoke with Wallace. He said you fixed a code conflict in the central panel without being asked. I noticed it during a system scan," Gabe said. "It was inefficient." Avery nodded slowly. Then she opened the file in her hand. "Is this yours?" she asked. Gabe squinted. It was Ellie's red crayon resume. His heart stopped. "Oh, she keeps copies. I can see that." Avery almost smiled. She listed hugs like a champion. "I'm not sure how that translates to asset management." Gabe rubbed the back of his neck. "She's thorough." Avery looked at him more curious now than amused. "Why did you come to me that day?" she asked. "Not to HR. Not to apply online." "Why me?" Gabe hesitated, then answered honestly. "Because Ellie believes in people, and she saw something in you the rest of the world didn't warn her against." Avery blinked at that. For a moment, she looked less like a CEO and more like a woman who didn't quite know how to receive kindness. "I have a position opening on our systems integration team," she said. "It's part-time, but specialized. Your skills would be useful." Gabe stared at her, stunned. "I didn't ask for this," he said. "No," she replied, "but maybe you needed it." There was silence. Then Gabe extended his hand. "Thank you, Miss Sloane." She took it. "Call me Avery." And just like that, the glass between their worlds didn't feel so thick anymore. The boiler room on the 26th floor hummed with low mechanical rhythm metal on metal heat, pushing through grates, a system always on the verge of needing attention, but never quite breaking. Gabe stood over the circuit map, a faded blueprint pinned to the wall, and squinted through a sheen of sweat. The wiring didn't match the diagram, which meant someone had jury-rigged the panel years ago. He ran a hand across his beard and smiled faintly. Just like the old days, he muttered, pulling out his multi-tool. Since joining the maintenance team, Gabe had worked quietly, methodically. He clocked in early, stayed late, and tackled every repair request with the discipline of a man trying to rebuild something bigger than an HVAC unit, something like dignity, or trust, or a future. No one talked much to him. Maintenance crews usually stayed on their own floor of the food chain. But by the end of week 2, even the skeptical Wallace was starting to nod with a kind of respect. Guy doesn't just fix things, Wallace had muttered to another tech. He listens to them. Upstairs, however, someone else was listening too. Avery Sloane stood behind the tinted glass of her office, arms crossed as she watched the security monitor. The camera angle showed Gabe kneeling beneath a utility panel on the executive floor, rerouting wires as if he'd been born for it. He moved with precision, not rush. There was grace in it, which surprised her. Third day in a row, he's caught an error. No one else reported, said her assistant Rachel, handing her a fresh printout. He's not just fixing problems, he's improving the system. Avery nodded absently. What's he not doing? Rachel raised an eyebrow. He's not talking, not asking for anything, not taking breaks. Avery's gaze didn't leave the screen. That's what worries me. She wasn't used to people like Gabe Klein. Most of the men she dealt with in boardrooms wore ambition like cologne, loud and lingering. Gabe, on the other hand, moved through her world like a ghost with calloused hands. Quiet, competent, unclaimed by ego, and yet undeniably present. She turned away from the monitor. Ask Wallace to schedule a fire systems inspection on 31, she said. Tell him to send Gabe. Rachel blinked. That floor's clean. I know. Later that afternoon, Gabe was in the stairwell heading toward the 31st floor when he heard a sharp, rhythmic clatter from behind one of the corridor panels. It wasn't urgent, but it wasn't right either. He paused, knelt, and removed the screws. Inside, the sensor node had come loose from its housing, its bolt barely hanging on. Gabe reached into his belt pouch and carefully realigned it, fingers working with ease. As he tightened the last screw, he sensed someone behind him. He turned and froze. Avery Sloane stood just a few feet away, arms folded, heels clicking softly against the floor. You don't skip details, she said. No, Gabe replied, rising slowly. Details don't stay skipped. They come back louder. A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, brief but real. I had this floor inspected just last week. Gabe gave a small shrug. Then it wanted to be seen again. They stood there in the quiet for a moment, the hallway catching a patch of late-afternoon sun through the tall windows. It cast a warm glow between them, though neither moved closer. I used to build systems like these, Gabe said after a beat. Cities, actually. Before, things changed. I read your file, Avery replied. You left the industry 3 years ago. No litigation, no black marks. Just gone. He hesitated. It wasn't the work. It was everything else. Your wife. He nodded. Cancer. Quick. Unfair. Ellie was 5. Avery's voice softened. I'm sorry. So was I, he murmured. They lapsed into silence again. Then Avery's tone shifted, becoming businesslike again, but not cold. I'm holding a quarterly ops review next week. The systems team will be presenting. Wallace says you've already identified 3 efficiency gaps our last engineers missed. Gabe tilted his head. You want me in that meeting. I want your brain in that room, Avery said. The rest is optional. He smiled wryly. I'll need a cleaner shirt. You'll have one. I'll have it delivered. As she turned to leave, Gabe said quietly, Ellie thinks you're a superhero. Avery paused. I'm not, she replied, but I remember what it's like to wish one would show up. Then she walked away. That night, Gabe returned home to their modest apartment 2 rooms above a shuttered deli with a window that barely closed. Ellie was coloring at the table surrounded by scattered crayons and a half-finished peanut butter sandwich. "How was today?" she asked without looking up. "Productive," Gabe said, setting down his tool bag. "Met with Miss Sloane again." Ellie's eyes lit up. "Did she smile this time?" He chuckled. "A little." "I knew it," Ellie said confidently, digging through her box of crayons. "That means it's working. What is the fixing? You're not just fixing the building, Dad. You're fixing her." Gabe stopped, caught off guard. "I'm not sure that's how it works, Elle." She looked up with the full force of 8-year-old certainty. "People break, too. You just have to look where it's cracked." He sat down slowly across from her, overwhelmed by the strange truth in her words. "And what if they don't want to be fixed?" he asked. Ellie smiled. "Then you just sit with them until they do." In the quiet hours after Ellie had gone to bed, Gabe unfolded one of her drawings she'd left for him on the counter. 3 figures again. Him, Ellie, and now, unmistakably, a tall woman in a blazer with stars in her eyes, Avery. He stared at it for a long time, not because he believed in fairy tales, but because maybe, just maybe somewhere deep in the heart of a steel and glass tower, something human was waking up. The day the invitation came, Gabe nearly threw it away. Not a printed invitation, of course. Avery Sloane wasn't that kind of formal. It was a short message typed from her assistant and delivered by Wallace with a confused shake of the head. "Miss Adrian Sloane would like to invite you and your daughter to the executive pantry for a private dinner Thursday evening. 6:30 p.m. Gabe read it 3 times before daring to believe it wasn't a mistake. He waited until Ellie got home from school to tell her. She was already dropping her backpack with a crash when he held up the folded note. "We got invited somewhere," he said carefully. Ellie blinked. "Is it the dentist?" "No," he laughed. "It's dinner with Miss Sloane." Her face lit up like it was Christmas morning. "You mean like real dinner with her?" He nodded. Ellie spun once in the middle of the living room. "I have to wear my blue dress, the one with the silver belt." Gabe raised an eyebrow. "We don't have a silver belt. I'll draw one." Thursday came with surprising calm. Gabe left work early to help Ellie get ready. She sat on a stool in front of the cracked mirror, humming as he carefully braided her hair. "You look beautiful," he said when they finished. She nodded solemnly. "You look nervous." "I am." "Don't be. She likes you. She just doesn't know how to say it yet." Gabe swallowed hard. "That's not how bosses work, kiddo." Ellie grinned. "Then she's a different kind of boss." The executive pantry was nothing like a cafeteria. Gabe had expected metal chairs and lukewarm buffet trays. Instead, it was a sleek minimalist lounge with floor-to-ceiling windows, modern lighting, and a long wooden table set for 3. A soft jazz track played in the background, barely audible above the low hum of the city outside. Avery Sloane stood near the window in a deep green dress that looked effortless but expensive. She wasn't holding a tablet. No phone in sight. Just her arms crossed loosely, a glass of water in her hand, and an expression that wavered between composed and strangely uncertain. "You came," she said. "You invited us," Gabe replied. Ellie didn't wait. She marched up to Avery and held out a napkin. "I drew your superhero outfit," she announced, "in case you forget." Avery took the napkin with more reverence than most people would have given a diamond necklace. It showed her in a cape, of course, with Gabe and Ellie on either side. The son wore sunglasses. There were hearts in the sky. Avery smiled, small but sincere. "Thank you." Ellie climbed into her seat like she owned the place. Dinner was simple grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, and warm rolls served on ceramic plates. A private chef delivered it with a quiet nod and vanished. Gabe could barely touch his food. "Is this normal?" he asked Avery as Ellie chatted about spelling bees and playground rules. "Not at all," Avery said, sipping her water. "But maybe it should be. You invite employees to dinner, only the ones who arrive with crayon resumes and reprogram my building systems in their sleep." That made him smile. Ellie excused herself halfway through to explore the view, pressing her nose against the glass. The city lights glittered beneath her, and her reflection danced beside them. "She's good for you," Avery said softly. "She saved me," Gabe admitted. "After Lauren, my wife, passed, I wasn't sure I had anything left. But Ellie, she kept asking me to keep showing up. So I did." Avery leaned back, studying him. "You're different from the men I usually meet. I'm guessing they don't carry lunchboxes shaped like unicorns." She laughed, a brief, unguarded sound that startled them both. "No," she said. "They carry spreadsheets and grudges." Gabe looked at her more closely. There was something in her eyes tonight, fatigue maybe, but not from work. A kind of weariness that didn't sleep. "Who shows up for you?" he asked quietly. The question lingered longer than either of them expected. Avery didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked out toward Ellie. "I don't know," she admitted. "No one lately. I built walls to stay safe, and now I can't tell if I'm protecting myself or keeping everyone out." Gabe nodded. They feel the same from inside. A silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, just honest. Then came the knock. Rachel stood at the door, face pale. "There's a reporter in the lobby," she whispered, stepping inside. "Someone leaked a photo of Mr. Klein entering the executive floor. They're asking questions." Avery's eyes darkened. "Who leaked it? I'm guessing someone in legal," Rachel replied. "You've been under pressure lately about optics. This will light things up." Gabe tensed. "I didn't ask for attention. I know Avery said." But he could see it now, his face in some article titled "Single Dad in the Boardroom APR Gamble." And Avery would be painted as impulsive or unprofessional. This was her world. Reputation was currency. "I should go," he said, rising. "No," Avery replied, but Ellie had already sensed the shift. She stepped back from the window, eyes wide. "Did we do something wrong?" Gabe crouched in front of her. "No, sweetheart. But sometimes the world likes to pretend it understands things that it doesn't." Avery watched him go, her hands clenched at her sides. There was something she wanted to say, some words stuck in her throat like a truth she hadn't dared name. But by the time she found it, they were gone. That night, Gabe lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. "Are we in trouble?" Ellie asked from her mattress nearby. "No." "Is she?" Gabe hesitated. "I hope not." Ellie rolled over, hugging her stuffed unicorn close. "Then maybe we just have to fix her too." And in the dark, Gabe found himself whispering the same thing he once said beside a hospital bed, beside a grave, beside the mirror, when he couldn't recognize his own face. "We'll try." Avery Sloane stood in her office alone, the skyline behind her fading into dusk. The windows had always been her armor glass and elevation, giving her a kind of detachment, as though she lived above the consequences of ordinary life. But tonight, the glass felt thin, fragile, like someone had tapped on it from the inside and she could finally hear the cracks. The news had hit faster than expected. The gossip blogs ran with it. CEO invites janitor to dinner. Is this romance or recklessness? The worst part wasn't the headline, it was the comments, hundreds of them. Judging, twisting, mocking. She had faced corporate lawsuits with less venom. Avery reached for her phone 3 times to call Gabe, and 3 times she stopped. What would she say? "Sorry my world tried to turn yours into a scandal, but it wasn't just about him. Or Ellie. It was about something she'd buried long before either of them walked through her door, a fear of being seen for who she was underneath the titles and press releases. Vulnerable. Messy. Needing connection. She hadn't cried in years. Not when her mother walked out. Not when her father died of a stroke and left behind a pile of regrets. Not even when she signed her first billion-dollar deal. But tonight, her eyes stung. And still she didn't cry. She simply reached for her coat and whispered to no one, "Enough." Gabe didn't hear the knock at first. Ellie had just fallen asleep on the couch after another round of "Dad, can I draw one more superhero?" and the apartment was finally quiet. The soft hum of the heater and the worn groan of city pipes were his background music. Then came the knock, 3 short, deliberate raps. When he opened the door, he froze. Avery stood there, wind-swept and breathless, her coat clutched tightly around her. Her eyes, always composed, now shimmered under the flickering hallway light. "I didn't know where else to go," she said simply. He stepped aside. She walked in slowly, as though afraid her presence might fracture the space. Gabe closed the door behind her and watched as she looked around the apartment, bare walls, second-hand furniture, the warmth of a home held together by love and paper napkin drawings. "This is where you live," she murmured. "This is where we stay," he corrected softly. Avery turned to him, arms folded. "I didn't want that dinner to turn into whatever the press made it." "I know. I should have protected you." Gabe shook his head. "You gave Ellie a night she'll never forget. That matters more." She sat down on the edge of the armchair, her posture collapsing slightly as though the weight she carried had finally outlasted her spine. "I built my whole life on control, Gabe. Every meeting, every message, every moment scheduled and bulletproof. But ever since you two walked in, it's like—" "You're breathing," he offered. She laughed quietly. "More like I've been holding my breath for years and just noticed how quiet the world got." He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "I never meant to complicate things for you," he said. "You're a CEO. You answer to people who don't care about stories like ours." Avery looked at him, her voice a thread of something raw. "But I do." Gabe didn't answer. Not right away. Instead, he glanced toward the couch. Ellie had shifted her hand, tucked under her cheek, her drawing still clutched in her fingers. A new one, 3 capes, this time, not 2. I wanted to protect her from everything, he said quietly. The grief, the fear, the world getting colder every year. But she sees through walls. She saw something in you before I did. Avery stood again, walking to the window. Her reflection caught against the city lights. For the first time, she didn't look like a mogul. She looked like a woman trying to find the pieces of herself in a life too polished to feel real. "She reminds me of me," Avery whispered. "Not the version I show to the world, the one I forgot how to be." Gabe stepped forward slower now, like the moment deserved silence more than sound. "You came here tonight," he said, "not because you had to, but because you didn't want to be alone." She met his gaze. "Is that selfish?" "No," he said, "it's brave." They stood there in the quiet for a long time. Then Avery looked down at Ellie and her voice changed. "I didn't just come for you, I came for her too. I can't make the world easier for her, but I can be part of the reason it doesn't crush her spirit." Gabe swallowed hard, and for the first time he let himself believe that maybe he wasn't alone in this anymore. When Avery left, later that night, she didn't take the elevator. She took the stairs, step by step shedding the weight of everything she thought she had to be. She paused halfway down, took out her phone, and did something she hadn't done in years. She cleared her calendar. The next morning, she walked into her office before sunrise and called her communications director. "No interviews, no statements, no spin," she said firmly. "But Miss Crudowislone." "Make it stop," she said. "If they want a story, they can wait for the ending." Then she picked up Ellie's crayon drawing still on her desk where she'd left it the night of the dinner, and smiled. Not the kind of smile that came from PR wins or stock spikes, but the kind that came from choosing to stay, choosing to care, and letting go of who the world told you to be, just long enough to become someone worth being. The pediatric ER was warmer than Gabe expected, bright too, with murals of cartoon animals and balloon decals peeling slightly at the corners. But none of that warmth could reach him, where he sat hunched over a stiff plastic chair, his hands locked around Ellie's backpack. She was inside, fevered, pale, listless in a way that wasn't like her. She just laid down and didn't get back up, Gabe had told the nurse in a voice that sounded nothing like his own. They'd taken her in immediately, asking for insurance information he didn't have, speaking in clipped, efficient tones Gabe couldn't process. He'd signed whatever they put in front of him. Then they'd asked him to wait. So he did, and waited, and hoped. The door beside him creaked open. He looked up, startled. Avery Sloane stepped into the hallway. She was wearing jeans and a blazer over a t-shirt. No makeup, hair pulled into a low ponytail. She looked less like the CEO of a billion-dollar empire and more like someone who had run out the door without thinking twice. "Where is she?" she asked. Gabe rose slowly. "They're running tests." "Flu, strep dehydration, I called in a pediatric specialist," she interrupted. "Someone I trust. He's on his way." He blinked. "You..." "What?" She took a breath. "You don't have insurance. You didn't ask me for help." But I read between the lines. Gabe sank back into the chair, exhaustion crashing over him. "I didn't want you to think I was using you." Avery sat beside him, her voice low. "Then you don't know me at all." He turned to her, the fight draining out of his shoulders. "I can't lose her. I don't know what I'd be without her." "You'd still be her father," Avery said, "and she would still know that she's loved. That matters more than anything." They sat in silence. Then the door opened again. A nurse stepped out and smiled. "She's stable. Fever's down. You can come in." Gabe shot to his feet, then paused. "You want to..." Avery nodded. "Yes." Ellie lay beneath a thin blanket, her cheeks flushed but no longer ghost pale. Her eyes fluttered open when Gabe knelt beside her bed. "Hi, sweetheart," he whispered, brushing her hair off her forehead. She blinked slowly. "You brought her," she murmured. Avery leaned in. "Hey, hero." Ellie gave a tired, crooked smile. "I'm still your intern, right?" Avery laughed softly. "You're promoted." Ellie's fingers found Gabe's clutching tight. "I'm okay now," she whispered. "You can stop worrying." But he couldn't. Not yet. Hours passed in a soft blur. Doctors came and went, checking vitals, adjusting meds, leaving behind charts and silent glances that spoke of cautious optimism. Gabe sat unmoving beside the bed, watching the slow rhythm of Ellie's chest rise and fall. Avery never left the room. She stood near the window at first, then eventually pulled a chair close to Gabe's. There was no separation now, not between them, not between her and Ellie, not between who they'd been and who they were becoming. Gabe leaned back, voice barely above a breath. "You didn't have to come." "I know," she replied. "That's why I did." He looked at her, then really looked. And in that moment something shifted. Not grand or explosive, but quiet and irreversible. A knowing. A recognition. This woman had shown up when the rest of the world had disappeared. Later, when Ellie was asleep again, Avery stepped into the hallway to make a call. Rachel picked up on the second ring. "You're still at the hospital?" "I am," Avery said. "I need HR to begin enrollment paperwork for Gabe. Immediate benefits. I want him moved to full-time. He's not on contract. He is now." Rachel hesitated. "You're crossing lines, Avery." "No," she replied. "I'm removing one." By the time Avery returned, Gabe was sitting beside Ellie with her sketchbook in hand. He looked up as she entered. "She fell asleep mid-sentence," he said softly. "Was halfway through telling me how you should wear purple more often." Avery chuckled. "She's got strong opinions." "She gets that from her mother," Gabe murmured. "But the bravery, that's hers alone." Avery pulled the chair closer again, her eyes never leaving his. "You once asked me who shows up for me," she said. "The truth is, I haven't let anyone try." And now a beat past, then another. "Now I want to learn." Gabe nodded slowly. "That's all it takes, you know. The willingness." She looked down at Ellie, then back at him. "I think you both showed me how." Silence stretched between them again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was full of everything they didn't need to say out loud anymore. Then Avery stood and reached into her bag. She pulled out Ellie's napkin, drawing the one with the 3 caped figures. "I keep it on my desk," she said. "Every meeting, every day, just in case I forget what matters." Gabe swallowed the lump in his throat. You never forget. You just need someone brave enough to remind you. She nodded, pressing the napkin to her heart. Well then, I've been reminded. And in the quiet of that hospital room, something bigger than fear settled between them. Hope, not as a vague promise, but as a choice. One they were finally ready to make together. The boardroom on the 43rd floor was always kept a few degrees colder than necessary, the temperature intentionally calculated to sharpen focus and shorten arguments. Gabe stood at the far end of the long obsidian table shoulders, squared palms resting lightly against the edge of a sleek presentation screen. He was no longer wearing a tool belt or carrying wires. Today, he wore a charcoal gray shirt, tucked into pressed slacks, a loaner from Wallace who insisted he looked like someone they'd listened to. Across from him sat the senior systems team, 7 engineers, 2 consultants, and 1 executive vice president whose jaw had been tightening for the last 15 minutes. Avery Sloane was not present. Not yet. And that more than anything made Gabe's skin crawl. Your recalibration suggestions are ambitious, said the EVP, a lean man named Harrow with a tie too tight and a smile that never touched his eyes. But you've skipped protocol. You're not part of this team. You're not even part of this division. Gabe kept his voice level. I wasn't trying to replace anyone. I saw inefficiencies, some of them critical. I ran a simulation. That's all. Harrow tapped a pen against the table. And in doing so, you accessed system-level diagnostics that were never authorized. There, it was the angle of attack. Gabe's stomach coiled, but he didn't flinch. Everything I did was in the interest of preventing system failure. That HVAC feedback loop on sub-level 4. It was 5 days from causing a cascade. I didn't guess. I measured. Harrow opened his mouth again, but before the words could leave, the doors swept open. Avery walked in calm and unhurried, a black blazer over a soft cream blouse. The room shifted. Conversations cut off. Eyes snapped forward. She didn't sit at the head of the table. She stood beside Gabe. Mr. Klein's access was authorized, she said without preamble. By me. Harrow's face paled slightly, but his tone remained formal. That wasn't communicated through protocol. Neither was his solution, Avery replied. Which, by the way, just saved this company an estimated $640,000 in projected downtime and energy waste. Someone in the room coughed. Another adjusted their glasses. Harrow blinked. Avery looked at Gabe not with condescension or control, but with trust. I asked him here today because I want you all to understand something, she continued. Innovation doesn't always come from titles. Sometimes it comes from someone who still remembers what it means to build from the ground up. She paused, letting the words sink in. Effective immediately, Gabe Klein is being promoted to lead systems analyst for Sloan Corp Infrastructure Division. He will report directly to me. Murmurs flared across the table. One consultant raised a cautious hand. Forgive me, but does this mean he's managing the team? No, Avery said, her voice crisp. It means the team is about to learn from someone who's already been where our technology needs to go. Gabe felt his breath catch, not from the recognition, but from the weight of it. The responsibility. The second chance he hadn't dared hope for. He turned to Avery, his voice low. You didn't have to do that. She smiled, small but steady. I didn't have to. I wanted to. After the meeting, Gabe stepped out onto the open-air terrace 2 floors below, letting the wind rush against his skin. His hands trembled as he exhaled. The door clicked open behind him. He didn't turn, but he knew the footsteps. Avery leaned against the railing beside him, arms crossed. You did well in there, she said. I didn't feel like it. Doesn't matter. You showed up. He looked over at her, searching for the edge in her voice, but found none. Just sincerity. You really think I can do this? He asked. Avery nodded. You're already doing it. There was a long silence. Then Gabe said, I've been offered promotions before. Contracts. Better pay. But I always felt like I was just trading one version of exhaustion for another. And now he turned to face her fully. Now it feels like I'm walking into something that actually means something. Not just for me, for Ellie, for the people I work with, even for you. Avery met his gaze. There was a softness there he hadn't seen before, a quiet unveiling. "I'm not good at letting people in," she said. "But you didn't wait for an invitation. You just showed up, again and again." He took a step closer. "Because I see you. Not just the CEO. The woman who sits in hospitals without needing to be asked. The one who calls doctors at midnight because a little girl matters more than public relations." Avery blinked, her voice barely a whisper. "That night changed everything for me. For me, too," he said. They stood close now, shoulder to shoulder, hearts not touching, but undeniably aware of each other. "You know what Ellie said last night," Gabe continued. "She said you were already part of the family. She drew a house with a room just for you. Purple curtains." Avery laughed, but it caught on something deep. "I've never had purple curtains. You will," Gabe said, "if you want them." Another silence. Then she looked at him, eyes steady. "Is this your way of proposing something?" Gabe smiled. "Maybe. But there's no ring. Not yet." "Then what is it?" "A promise," he said, "to keep showing up, even on the days when it's hard. Especially then." Avery's breath hitched. She reached out and took his hand. And, for the first time, neither of them needed to say the words out loud. This wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of a new kind of partnership, of a team neither had known they needed, of love, not the kind that starts with fireworks, but the kind that grows from steady hands and soft, unwavering truth, and under the wind of a city that had never once paused for either of them. They stood still, together. The call came on a rainy Wednesday. Gabe had just picked Ellie up from school and was helping her make grilled cheese in the tiny kitchen when his phone buzzed with a number he didn't recognize. He nearly ignored it, his attention fixed on Ellie's careful slicing of strawberries into heart shapes. But something in his gut told him to answer. Mr. Klein said, the voice on the line clipped and efficient. "This is Janet Boone, from Sloan Corp Legal Affairs. I'm afraid there's an issue that's come up regarding your recent promotion." Gabe's heart dropped. "I'm listening." "There's been a formal complaint filed by a member of the executive board," she continued. "They're alleging a breach of internal hiring protocol citing favoritism and unauthorized access to proprietary data." Gabe gripped the edge of the countertop, his knuckles white. "That's not true. Ms. Quarry, Ms. Sloan approved everything." "Yes, we're aware. However, internal policy requires us to investigate any grievance raised by a board member, and in the meantime, you'll be placed on temporary suspension with pay pending review. Please return your badge tomorrow." Avery didn't find out until the next morning. She was in the middle of a strategy session when Rachel slid a manila folder onto the table and leaned in with a hushed urgency. "Someone went behind your back," Rachel said. "Filed a complaint about Gabe's appointment." Avery's face hardened. "Who, Harrow?" He submitted a 6-page memo claiming you circumvented protocol and pushed through a promotion for someone personally connected to you. The blood in Avery's veins ran ice cold. What about the systems data, the efficiency reports, the disaster he prevented, buried under language about process violations and favoritism? Avery stood from the table, ignoring the questioning looks from her team. "Clear my afternoon, and get me security footage from the ops wing for the last 2 weeks." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "You think it was more than just a memo. I think someone's afraid of being outperformed." That night, Gabe packed his tools into a canvas bag with quiet resignation. Ellie sat on the couch with her knees tucked to her chest, watching him. "They're taking it back, aren't they?" she asked softly. He didn't answer. Instead, he zipped the bag closed and turned to her. "It's just for now. They have rules, and someone twisted the rules to make it look like we broke them." Her eyes welled with tears. "But you didn't." "No," he said, "but not everyone plays fair." Ellie was silent for a long moment. Then, without a word, she slipped off the couch and disappeared into the bedroom. Gabe sighed and slumped into the chair, the silence of the room pressing down on his shoulders like weight he'd carried too many times before. A few minutes later, Ellie returned holding something in both hands, a small pink unicorn notebook. "I have something," she said, holding it out. "I didn't know if it mattered, but I think maybe it does now." He took it gently and opened to the page she pointed at. A printed, still image. Grainy, but clear enough. A man in a gray suit, Harrow standing outside the server room with another staff member holding what appeared to be a USB drive. The timestamp matched the day Gabe's diagnostic files had mysteriously leaked without his knowledge. Gabe stared at it, stunned. "Where did you get this?" "I borrowed your laptop once," Ellie said quietly, "when you were asleep. I wanted to make a slideshow of your first day at work, like for a memory book, but I saw the building camera folder was open and I got curious." He exhaled a breath that was part disbelief, part awe. "You might have just saved my job." Ellie shrugged. "You said we're a team." Avery stared at the footage on her office screen in stunned silence. She had spent the last 6 hours combing through access logs, door records, and complaint memos, but it was Ellie's screenshot that finally brought everything into focus. She turned to Rachel. "Draft a formal response. Include the footage and the access timestamps. Submit it directly to the Board Ethics Committee." Rachel nodded. What about Harrow Avery's voice was sharp but calm. "Suspend him. Effective immediately." When Gabe returned to the building the next morning, it was Avery herself waiting at the security desk. She handed him a new badge pressed into his palm with quiet finality. "You're reinstated," she said. "Fully. And Harrow has been placed on leave pending review." He stared at her. "How?" "Ellie," she said simply. She found the truth. "You raised a detective." Gabe laughed, the sound shaky and full of something bigger than relief. "I don't know what to say." Avery stepped closer, her voice soft. "Say you'll come back." He looked down at the badge, then up at her. "I never really left." That evening, Avery visited their apartment for the first time since that night in the rain. Ellie opened the door, already wearing her meeting someone important dress. She held out a cookie in one hand and a new drawing in the other. This time, the drawing had 4 people. Ellie, Gabe, Avery, and someone new, a figure in a gray suit walking away, a sign in the background that said, "Don't be mean." Avery laughed and crouched beside her. "Did you draw that today?" Ellie nodded. "It's called Justice." "I asked the teacher how to spell it." Avery's eyes shimmered. "You spelled it perfectly." She looked up at Gabe, then who leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, smiling. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded. "We're good, because you didn't back down." Avery stepped inside, her voice steady but full of warmth. "None of this happened because I stood up. It happened because Ellie did, and because you didn't run when it would have been easier." He looked at her, heart full. And somewhere between truth, consequence, and crayons they found something stronger than vindication. They found a bond neither sabotage nor fear could undo, because what had started with a folded resume had become a life they were now building together. The elevator dinged softly as it reached the 25th floor of the Sloan Residence's Avery's personally designed apartment complex, nestled beside the city's botanical gardens. The air inside the building was different than anywhere Gabe had lived, warm, clean, quiet. Not sterile, not cold, just peaceful. He stepped out with Ellie holding his hand, her eyes wide with the kind of reverence she usually reserved for libraries and amusement parks. "Are we really allowed to be here?" she whispered. Gabe smiled, still not entirely believing it himself. Avery said it's temporary, until things settle. Until we figure out what comes next. Ellie tilted her head. "I thought we were already figuring it out." They turned the corner and found Avery waiting outside a door marked 2504, holding a keycard and a clipboard. She wasn't in her usual CEO attire. No heels, no blazer, just jeans, a soft blouse, and a light nervousness dancing in her eyes. "I know it's a bit of a leap," she said, handing Gabe the keycard. "But I had the unit refreshed New Sheet's groceries stocked, and there's a corner by the window I thought might work well for Ellie's drawing table." Gabe took the card slowly. "You did all that. I used to think homes were built with concrete and contracts," Avery said. "Turns out sometimes they start with a promise and a crayon drawing." Ellie tugged Gabe's hand. "Can we see it?" He looked at Avery. She nodded once. Inside, the apartment smelled of lemon oil and something faintly floral. The floors were light oak, the kitchen sleek and modern but inviting. Big windows lined the far wall, and sure enough in the corner stood a small white desk with colored pencils already arranged in jars. Ellie gasped and ran to it, dropping her backpack with a thunk. "There's even purple curtains," she shouted. She remembered Gabe turned to Avery, overwhelmed. "I don't know what to say." She looked up at him, her voice quieter. "Say you'll stay as long as you need." He hesitated. "Then I need longer than I want to admit." Her eyes softened. "Then it's yours." Later that evening, after Ellie had finished drawing her official first meal here, sketch 3 stick figures eating grilled cheese at a sunlit table, Avery offered to take them both to the garden terrace. The sun was beginning to dip low, casting amber light across the skyline. Ellie skipped ahead toward the fountain, chasing the breeze, while Gabe and Avery walked slowly behind. "This doesn't feel like a favor," he said after a while. "It feels like a turning point." Avery folded her arms, watching Ellie laugh as she splashed her fingers in the water. "That's because it is. For all of us." He turned to her. "You don't usually let people into your life like this." "I know that." She nodded, lips tight. "It's easier to manage the narrative when no one's too close." And now Avery exhaled. "Now I'm realizing closeness doesn't make you weaker. It just makes you accountable to something bigger than yourself." He smiled gently. "She changed you." "She changed both of us," Avery replied, looking at Ellie. "She's the kind of reminder I didn't know I needed." They stood there for a moment, watching the little girl who had stitched their 2 lives together without even realizing it. Then Avery said something so soft, so unguarded, it caught him off balance. "Do you think she'll ever feel like this is her real home?" Gabe didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to where Ellie stood and crouched beside her. "Hey, Elle. He asked if we stayed here a while longer. Then a while, even would you be okay with that?" Ellie tilted her head, thoughtful. "Do we get to eat together every night?" "Yes. And can I draw on the fridge? We'll check with management." She grinned. "Then it's already home." Avery smiled, blinking fast as if the wind had caught her eyes the wrong way. That night, after Ellie had gone to bed in her new room, her walls already pinned with taped-up drawings, Avery lingered in the living room with Gabe. The apartment was quiet but alive. It felt lived in. She reached for her bag and pulled something out, a framed sketch Ellie had given her days earlier. 3 figures again, this time under a banner that read, "We fix things together." Avery placed the frame on the bookshelf. "I was wrong," she said softly. "About what?" "About where strength comes from. I thought it was control, strategy, isolation. But it's this: showing up, saying yes to people who need you, letting them need you back." Gabe stepped closer, his voice full of something unsaid for too long. "You don't have to keep holding everything alone." She looked up at him. "Neither do you." They stood there, inches apart, the silence not empty but full of every moment they'd walked through, every wall they'd quietly dismantled. And then, slowly, she reached for his hand. No grand declaration, no romantic fanfare. Just 2 people standing in the middle of a borrowed apartment, finally letting the idea of family stretch enough to hold them both. Because sometimes you don't find home. Sometimes home finds you. The sun had just dipped below the horizon when the 3 of them stepped into Lincoln Park. The late autumn breeze carried a soft chill, but the kind that brought people closer, not apart. Avery held Ellie's mittened hand as they walked past tall oaks shedding the last of their leaves. Gabe carried a paper bag filled with sandwiches and thermoses of hot cocoa, a quiet picnic Ellie's idea. "It's called Celebration Night," Ellie explained on the way, "because we're all finally in the same place at the same time. And happy." Gabe had looked at Avery then, uncertain if she was just humoring his daughter. But the warmth in her smile wasn't something you could fake. Now, under the golden glow of the park's lampposts, Ellie ran ahead toward a bench near the fountain. She laid out a scarf like a tablecloth and carefully began unpacking her portion of the picnic with a level of seriousness reserved for astronauts or wedding planners. Avery watched her amused. "She takes joy seriously." Gabe nodded. "She's her mother's child." A moment of silence passed between them, not awkward, but reverent. "She would have liked you," Gabe added quietly. Avery looked over. "Your wife?" He nodded. "She'd have seen the fire in you, and she'd have told me not to screw it up." Avery's expression softened. "She sounds wise." She was, and wild, and warm. Losing her. It tore everything loose inside me. I didn't just lose a partner, I lost direction. Ellie kept me moving, but I wasn't living. Not really. He looked down as if the leaves at his feet held the memory of that pain. And now, Avery asked gently. He turned toward her. "Now I'm scared again. But not of losing. I'm scared of wanting." The confession hit harder than he expected, but Avery didn't look away. "You're not the only one," she whispered. They watched Ellie dance in the distance, her arms outstretched, her scarf billowing behind her like a cape. "She thinks we're already a family," Avery said. Is she wrong? Avery didn't answer at first. Instead, she walked a few steps ahead and looked up at the sky, the stars beginning to blink into life above the trees. When she turned back, something unguarded had opened in her expression. "My mother once told me that love makes people reckless, that it clouds your judgment and turns you soft. She meant it as a warning. I lived by it for years." She paused. "But I've never felt clearer than I do when I'm near you." Gabe stepped closer, slow and deliberate. "I don't need you to fix anything," he said. "I just want you here when the days are easy and when they're not." Their eyes locked, and for a long moment the park around them fell away. No past, no future, just this moment, honest, fragile, alive. And then Gabe reached out gently, brushing a strand of hair behind Avery's ear. She leaned into the touch without hesitation. When their lips met, it wasn't cinematic or dramatic. It was soft, grounded. A kiss that said, "I see you. I'm staying. I'm not afraid anymore." It lasted just long enough for Ellie's gasp to echo across the lawn. She stood a few feet away, wide-eyed and beaming. Finally, she declared, dropping her sandwich and clapping both hands together like she'd just seen fireworks. Avery laughed into Gabe's shoulder, her face flushed. "Well, I guess we're not subtle." Ellie skipped toward them and wrapped her arms around both. "Does this mean I can call her almost Mom? Or is that weird?" Gabe chuckled, kneeling. "Let's stick with Avery for now." "Fine," Ellie said dramatically. "But you both need matching pajamas if this is going to be official." Avery tilted her head. "That's your metric for family." Ellie shrugged. That and Saturday pancakes. They spent the rest of the evening watching Ellie build leaf piles and make declarations about things she would do when she was grown, like run a company where everyone could bring their pets and their feelings. As they walked back toward the car, Gabe reached for Avery's hand and held it in full view of the world. No more hiding. No more pretending they were something less than everything. That night, after Ellie had gone to sleep, curled against her stuffed unicorn in her new room, Gabe and Avery stood on the apartment balcony. The city glowed beneath them, but neither looked out. They looked at each other. "I used to measure my life by achievements," Avery said. "Deadlines, deals, projections, but none of that made me feel safe. Not like this." Gabe stepped closer. "You're safe here." Her voice wavered. "So are you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded slip of paper, Ellie's original resume, for him, the one that had started it all. He unfolded it, revealing the uneven letters and smudged stars. I can clean. I'm quiet. I don't cry in front of people. I can help. I can learn. Please." Gabe's throat tightened. This was a cry for hope. From her. From me. He looked at Avery. "And you answered." Avery took the paper, pressed it to her chest, and whispered, "She wasn't the only one." Then she leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. And in that quiet above a city that had once made them feel small, they stood steady, no longer alone, no longer waiting. Because when love finds you not in perfection, but in perseverance, you don't need vows. You just need someone who stays. The conference room was filled with sunlight the next morning, spilling across the glass walls and polished floor like a quiet promise. The space, usually so stark and intimidating, felt different today, warmer, more human. Avery sat at the head of the long oak table, dressed not in a tailored suit, but in a soft cream blouse and a quiet steadiness that made her seem both powerful and entirely at peace. Next to her, Gabe adjusted his tie, clearly borrowed, clearly uncomfortable. Across from them, seated in neat rows, were the senior board members of the Sloan Foundation and the company's executive council people, who for years had looked at Avery and seen only strategy, efficiency, control. They had no idea what was coming. Avery stood, let the silence settle, then spoke. "Before we begin, I'd like to share a story, not from a quarterly report and not from our legal team, from my life." A pause. No one moved. Months ago, a single father walked into this building with a resume in his hand. Not for himself, but for his daughter. She was 8. Her resume said she could clean quietly, she didn't cry much, and that she could learn. It said, "Please." A soft murmur rippled through the room. Avery glanced at Gabe, who held her gaze with quiet strength. That piece of paper cracked something open in me. Not because of what it said, but because of what it meant. It meant someone believed she was worth showing up for, even if the world hadn't yet shown up for them. She took a breath. Since then, I've come to believe that leadership isn't just what happens in this room. It's what happens when no one's watching, when we decide to care, even when it costs us. Especially when it costs us. Avery lifted a folder from the table and slid it forward. Today, I'm proposing a new initiative, the Worth Project. A program dedicated to supporting single parents, caregivers, and displaced families through education grants, housing stipends, and job placement. It starts with 10 families in this city. I hope it ends with hundreds more. The boardroom was quiet. Then an older man with silver-rimmed glasses leaned forward. "Is this personal for you, Miss Ian Sloan?" She didn't flinch. "It's human." Later that afternoon, as the three of them strolled through the park, Avery barefoot in the grass for the first time in years, Ellie skipped ahead chasing pigeons with shrieks of laughter. "You were incredible today," Gabe said. Avery smiled, her hand brushing his. "I just told the truth." "No," he said. "You told our truth." She turned to him, emotions pooling behind her eyes. "It took me so long to stop thinking that strength meant standing alone." Gabe leaned in, brushing his forehead against hers. "Now you're surrounded." She closed her eyes and whispered, "And finally home." Weeks passed. The apartment no longer felt borrowed, it felt lived in. The fridge had Ellie's newest drawings, and the living room had a permanent dent where the three of them piled onto the couch each Friday for movie night. Ellie had discovered an obsession with 80s music and insisted Gabe learn every lyric to "Take on Me." He did. Badly. One Sunday morning, while pancakes sizzled in the background, Ellie sat at the table with a new drawing. It was simpler than her usual work, no unicorns or flying dolphins. Just 3 figures holding hands under a banner that read, "I knew you'd stay." Gabe looked over her shoulder and gently rested his hand on hers. "Who's it for?" he asked. Ellie looked up, grinning. "Us. But I want to give it to her, because even when she didn't know it, she was already part of our family." That afternoon, Ellie stood in the same lobby where it had all begun. Same security desk. Same marble floors. But this time she wasn't holding a folded resume. She was holding a frame. Avery crouched beside her. "This is for you," Ellie said, placing the drawing in her hands. "It's the final version. I'm not editing anymore." Avery blinked back tears. "Why now?" Ellie shrugged. "Because we're done applying. You're already hired." Avery burst into laughter and pulled her into a hug. Gabe watched Heartful Soul steady. And just like that, what began as a desperate plea in a quiet child's handwriting had become something far bigger. A home. A partnership. A love not built from perfection, but from showing up again and again, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. That evening, with the city glowing outside their window and the world feeling wide open, Avery curled up beside Gabe on the balcony, a blanket around them both. Ellie was asleep, her stuffed unicorn tucked under her chin. "Do you remember what she wrote?" Avery asked softly. The first line, Gabe nodded. "I can clean. I'm quiet." "No," Avery whispered. "The last part. The one that broke me." She leaned into him. "Please." He wrapped his arm around her. "She doesn't have to say please anymore," he said. "None of us do," Avery murmured. "We're already chosen." And in that stillness where two broken paths had joined to become something whole, something healed, they sat quietly holding not just each other but everything they'd built. Single Dad gave CPR to a collapsed jogger. She woke up and whispered, "I'm your new boss." The sky over Portland had just begun to pale, the morning still wrapped in a shroud of mist. Streetlights blinked against the retreating night and a soft drizzle clung to the air like breath on glass. Jake Miller adjusted the zipper on his hoodie, the fabric still warm from his overnight shift repairing elevator panels in one of Beacon Lux's older hotels. His feet ached, his back throbbed, but the run was non-negotiable. It was the only time he could outrun the ghosts. His daughter Sophie had been quiet that morning. She always was on Thursdays. That was the day her mother used to pack her lunch with little paper notes until the notes stopped. Until the woman who wrote them collapsed in their living room 3 years ago, blue-lipped and silent while Jake fumbled with 911 and did nothing else. He hadn't known how to save her. He never forgot that. Now, every Thursday after dropping Sophie at school, he ran. Not to stay in shape. Not really. It was a penance and maybe a prayer to become someone better. The path through Tanglewood Park wound like a sleepy serpent curling under trees just waking from autumn slumber. His feet thudded against damp pavement in rhythm, his breath sharp in his throat. Just ahead, a lone jogger, slender-billed ponytail swinging, pace crisp. He registered her the way any tired man does distantly. Not important. Just another early riser. But then she faltered. At first it looked like a misstep, an ankle twist perhaps. She slowed, brought a hand to her ribs. Then she staggered sideways into the grass, knees buckling as if gravity had suddenly turned cruel. Her body folded limp. Jake stopped running. For a split second, everything froze. The air thickened. The scene mirrored another one, the color draining from a woman's face, fingers twitching, eyes wide with terror. Not again. He sprinted toward her. "Ma'am." "Hey, are you okay?" he called out, dropping to his knees beside her. No response. He touched her shoulder, then her neck cold. He turned her gently. Her skin was ashen, her lips tinged blue. He couldn't feel a pulse. His throat closed. Not again. Not again. Hands trembling, he yanked out his phone. No signal. Of course. This part of the park always dropped calls. He looked around. Empty paths. No joggers, no cyclists, no early dog walkers. His heart slammed in his chest. Think Jake. Do something. He tilted her chin, checked her airway. No obstruction. His brain called up the training videos he'd obsessed over after Marcy died. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. Repeat. Focus. He placed his hands on her chest and began the compressions. 1, 2, 3. He counted aloud, trying to keep the tempo. Her ribs pushed back under his palms, then gave a little. He didn't stop. His breath came harder now, both from exertion and panic. "Come on," he murmured. Don't you quit on me. Not today. 30 compressions. He leaned down, gave 2 breaths. Her chest rose faintly. Still nothing. He repeated the sequence. Again. By the 3rd round, his arms were shaking. Please, he said, voice cracking. Please don't do this. A spasm. Then a gurgled inhale. Her body jerked beneath his hands. She coughed violently, eyes flying open with wild confusion. She gasped again, rolling slightly to her side. Jake fell back on his heels, his arms trembling with the rush of adrenaline. "You're okay," he panted. "You're okay. Just breathe." The woman blinked, vision blurry. Her chest heaved. She focused on him, sweat-soaked, breathing hard mud on his knees. Her lips moved, barely audible. What he asked, leaning closer. She coughed again, then whispered hoarse and strange, "I'm your new boss." Jake stared at her. What? But her eyes fluttered closed again, not unconscious this time, just drained, overwhelmed. Sirens echoed distantly through the park. Someone must have finally spotted them. He sat beside her, soaked in sweat, chilled to the bone, watching the woman he'd just pulled back from the edge of death. My new boss. No way. But even as doubt flickered through him, a cold certainty formed. There had been rumors about new management at Beacon Lux, a new CEO, out of state. No one had seen her yet. And now this woman with the sleek ponytail, the expensive runner's watch, and those commanding features, she didn't look like someone who got up at dawn to jog without reason. Jake's heart thudded again, but for an entirely different reason. Because if she really was the new boss, he just saved the life of the one person who had the power to change his own. And she didn't even know his name. Jake sat hunched at the kitchen table, the soft click of the wall clock echoing louder than it should. A single bulb buzzed overhead, casting pale light across the scratched wooden surface. Sophie, 8 years old and always too observant, was coloring quietly across from him, her knees tucked under a hoodie 2 sizes too big. She hadn't said much since they got home from school. Thursdays were like that. Jake hated Thursdays. He watched her hand move slowly across the page, outlining a figure with wings and messy hair. "Is that an angel?" he asked softly. Sophie nodded, but didn't look up. "It's Mom," she said. Jake's throat closed. He reached for his mug. Cold coffee. He hadn't even realized he poured it. Sophie glanced up at him, then tilting her head in that way she did when she was working up the courage to ask something heavy. "If you had known CPR when Mom got sick, would she have lived?" Jake flinched like he'd been struck. He couldn't lie to her. Not Sophie. "I don't know, baby," he said, voice low. "Gravel thick? Maybe." She looked down again, nodding slowly. "But now you know it right." "Yeah," he said. "I do." She didn't speak again, but he saw it in her eyes, some quiet shift. A puzzle piece fitting into place. That's how Sophie processed grief slowly inwardly, like a secret language no one else was allowed to hear. He didn't tell her what happened that morning in the park, didn't tell her that the woman he saved might be the reason he didn't get the job transfer last week, didn't tell her that when she opened her eyes and said, "I'm your new boss," his stomach had dropped not from fear, but from the strange collision of fate and irony. Later that night, after Sophie had gone to bed, Jake stood at the kitchen counter staring at the email still glowing on his phone. The subject line read, "Beacon Lux Staffing Decision. Application Status Update." He had read it 3 times already, but each word still felt like a slap. "Thank you for your interest. At this time we have chosen a candidate whose qualifications better align with our current staffing needs." He scrolled down his thumb, brushing the screen like it could change something. He had applied to move to the daytime maintenance supervisor role. Better hours, benefits, no more late-night scrambling for childcare. Sophie could sleep normal hours. He could be a real dad again. But the rejection came 2 nights ago. And now, like some cosmic joke, he might have saved the life of the very person who signed off on that denial. Meanwhile, across town, Evelyn Hart lay in a quiet hospital room, lit only by the soft glow of a monitor and the flicker of muted news from a wall-mounted television. She wasn't watching. Her mind was looping one moment over and over. The park, the blur of light, her chest burning, the weight on her ribs, the voice counting out compressions. And then those eyes. Concerned, exhausted, familiar somehow, though she knew they had never met. A knock on the door broke her trance. Her assistant, Melanie, stepped in holding a manila folder and a to-go coffee tray. "You really should be resting," Melanie said, setting the coffee down. "But I figured you wouldn't." Evelyn gave a small smile. "You know me well." Melanie handed over the folder. "You asked for the top 10 maintenance staff profiles, starting with night crews, from Beacon Lux, Portland." Evelyn opened the folder and froze. There he was. Jacob Miller, current role overnight repair technician, part-time. Previous employment contractor. Education high school diploma, 1 technical certification. Application status. Denied for promotion. Insufficient supervisory experience. She stared at the profile photo. Same worn eyes, same heavy brow. A man who looked like he carried too much weight for one pair of shoulders. "This is him," she said quietly. Melanie frowned. "The guy who saved you?" Evelyn nodded. "Want me to flag him for HR?" Evelyn shook her head. "Not yet. I want to meet him again first. At work." Melanie hesitated. "You sure? That's a pretty big gesture." Evelyn leaned back, a strange ache in her ribs, reminding her of how close she'd come to not being here. "I'm not sure of anything right now," she said, "except that I owe that man my life, and that maybe I was wrong about more than just one file." Back at Jake's apartment, he stood at the small window overlooking the dim parking lot, watching the flicker of rain under a lone street lamp. A half-done drawing of Sophie and her mom was taped to the fridge behind him. In the photo next to it, Jake's wife, Marcy, was laughing, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. He touched the edge of the picture with calloused fingers. "I did better today," he whispered. He didn't know what would come of it. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. But he knew one thing. When the woman he saved opened her eyes and looked at him like he mattered, like he wasn't invisible, a small part of him, long dormant, had stirred awake. Hope. Real, trembling hope. And that was something he hadn't felt in years. The steady beeping of the heart monitor was oddly soothing. Evelyn Hart lay still, her eyes half closed against the afternoon light creeping in through the hospital blinds. She hated hospitals, always had. The sterile smell, the way time folded into itself inside the walls like the world outside had paused, but no one told you. But today she didn't mind it as much, because she was alive. And that was something she hadn't taken for granted. Until yesterday. Her ribs still ached with every breath. CPR did that, apparently. She'd read it in textbooks, heard it in staff briefings, but it was different. Feeling the echo of someone's desperate effort pressing life back into your chest. Real. Human. She remembered the man's face vividly now. Strong jaw, concerned eyes, a sweat-streaked brow. Not a stranger in the moment, but something more, something familiar, almost grounding. A knock tapped softly on the door. "Come in," she said. Melanie entered, heels clicking softly against the tile, carrying 2 things, a sleek laptop and a small paper bag that smelled like real food. Smuggled in a sandwich. Turkey and Havarti. They've got you on enough IV fluids to drown a person. Evelyn smiled faintly. "You always know what matters." Melanie perched on the edge of the visitor's chair. "Doctor says you're doing better than expected. Might be out of here tomorrow." Evelyn nodded absently, gaze already shifting to the laptop as Melanie opened it and turned the screen toward her. "You asked for the staffing shortlist. Night crew applicants. This is everyone who's applied for permanent daytime roles in the last 30 days. Evelyn clicked through the files, slowly scanning familiar formats, name, photo, position, status, rejection notes. Then she stopped. Jacob Miller. She didn't need to read the rest right away. One glance at the grainy badge photo and she knew. It was him, the man who'd knelt beside her, who'd saved her life. Her breath caught not from pain but from the collision of gratitude and disbelief. She read the file again, this time slowly. Part-time overnight maintenance technician, high reliability scores, single-parent status noted in HR remarks, recent application to daytime supervisory position denied, reason limited formal education, no direct management experience. Was this signed off last week? She asked. Melanie nodded. By interim leadership. Before you arrived. Evelyn stared at the rejection note. Cold, clinical. She'd seen 1,000 like it. She'd even written many herself. Efficiency, metrics, structure, all the polished words that kept companies moving. But none of those words had been gasping for air in a field yesterday. None of them had held her life in shaking hands and refused to let go. She leaned back, closing her eyes. I don't want anyone to reach out to him. Not yet. Melanie frowned. You sure you don't think it would mean something? I want to see him in his own world. First, Evelyn interrupted gently, where he doesn't feel like someone's watching. I want to understand how I didn't see him before, how we miss people like him. Melanie gave a reluctant nod and stood. Well, you'll have a chance soon. Your first full site visit scheduled for Beacon Lux Portland this Friday. Ground inspection, staff meet and greet. Evelyn arched a brow. That fast? You insisted on transparency and leadership on the floor, remember? Melanie smirked. You wrote the playbook. Evelyn smiled faintly. I did, didn't I? But the smile faded as Melanie left and the door clicked shut behind her. The room was quiet again, and Evelyn sat in that silence not as a CEO but as a woman who'd nearly died, and had been brought back not by power, not by policy, but by compassion. Across town, Jake stood inside the supply closet of the Beacon Lux Hotel checking a clipboard with smudged fingerprints and ink circles around half the entries. His hands were still scraped from the morning's ductwork job. One of the air handler units on the rooftop had blown out, and the elevator control panel on the east wing kept blinking fault for no apparent reason. It was a standard Thursday, tired, thankless, necessary. He took a sip of cold coffee from a thermos that had seen better days, then headed toward the elevator shaft toolbox swinging from one hand. The hallway was pristine polished marble floors, minimalist art pieces, LED sconces humming gently. Everything about the hotel screamed intentional luxury, except maybe the maintenance guy with oil on his collar. Jake crouched by the panel, his mind drifting. I'm your new boss. The words had rung in his ears since the park. He hadn't told anyone. Not even Miguel, the only coworker who didn't pretend Jake didn't exist. Part of him wasn't sure it had really happened, and part of him feared that if she remembered him, it might not change anything. He wasn't a resume standout. No college degree, no fancy credentials. Just a guy who showed up, fixed things, and clocked out. Who went home to a daughter and tried to make her believe the world was still good. He'd applied for the daytime shift not because he wanted to climb, but because he needed to be present for Sophie. School pickups, homework help, a decent bedtime. He didn't want to chase prestige. He just wanted to be there when she needed him. But Beacon Lux didn't care about bedtime stories. Jake sighed, closing the panel and tightening the last screw. As he stood up, he didn't notice the elevator doors down the hall slide open, or the tall woman stepping out flanked by her assistant and two mid-level managers in suits. Evelyn Hart stopped mid-step when she saw him, her heart catching in her chest. He looked just like he had that morning, tired, focused, unaware of anyone watching. Only now the fluorescent hallway lights flickered off his shoulders like armor. Melanie whispered, "That's him." Right. Evelyn didn't answer. She didn't need to, because something had shifted inside her, something unspoken and profound. And for the first time in years she felt the sting of humility, the realization that sometimes the people who carry the most weight are the easiest to overlook. She stepped forward, but not to speak yet. She wanted to see him, really see him first. And when the moment was right, she'd make sure he knew. She remembered everything. The Beacon Lux lobby was a masterpiece of understatement. Clean lines, warm wood accents, and soft jazz floating through the air like invisible perfume. Guests with designer luggage glided across polished floors while staff offered practice smiles, never breaking rhythm. Jake didn't belong here. Not really. He stepped out of the service hallway with a mop handle in one hand and a wrench sticking from his back pocket, sweat clinging to his temples. The suit-clad guests didn't even glance his way. That was the job stay invisible fix things before anyone notices they're broken. "Hey, Miller," a voice called. Jake turned. It was Russell Hines, operations manager. Late 40s, gelled hair smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Jake straightened slightly. "Morning." Russell looked him over. "Air handler on 5 still giving us trouble. Should be back online within the hour." Russell nodded slowly. "That's good. Try not to use the guest elevators in the meantime. We've got corporate upstairs." Jake gave a clipped nod. "Understood." Russell lingered, eyes sharp. "Big visit today. New leadership wants to shake hands with the staff. Word is the new CEO might actually step foot into the boiler room. Imagine that." There was a faint smirk on his lips as he turned and walked away, but Jake didn't take the bait. He'd been around long enough to know how this worked. Upper management made appearances, handed out lukewarm praise, and disappeared behind mirrored doors again. He didn't expect anything different. Still, as he headed back into the staff corridor, something buzzed low in his gut like a wire humming before it sparked. Evelyn walked the hallways of the hotel slowly, her heels muffled against plush carpet. Every wall, every corner spoke of design decisions she had once signed off from 1,000 miles away. Now it felt foreign. She stopped outside the maintenance wing, flanked by Melanie and Russell. "I want to see where the repair staff works," Evelyn said. Russell hesitated, then forced a smile. "Of course, just keep in mind, ma'am, it's not exactly guest-facing." "Neither are heart valves," Evelyn replied, still pretty critical. Melanie gave a small stifled chuckle. Russell cleared his throat and opened the door. The hallway changed instantly. Gone were the soft lights and scented air. The tile here was utilitarian, the air laced with machine oil and faint traces of bleach. But it was honest, grounded. They passed a narrow office space where 2 techs hunched over schematics. Further down, a half-open door revealed a man in coveralls bent over an electrical panel. Evelyn's steps slowed. It was Jake. He didn't see her yet. His sleeves were rolled up, forearms streaked with grime, a pencil tucked behind his ear. There was a rhythm to the way he worked, focused, methodical. The kind of precision that didn't come from degrees but from years of repetition failure adjustment. "Leave us," Evelyn said quietly. Russell blinked. "Excuse me, I'd like to speak with him alone." Russell hesitated, then gave a tight nod and motioned for Melanie to follow. "Of course." When the hallway cleared, Evelyn stepped forward. She didn't say his name, just waited. Jake felt the presence before he heard it. He turned startled, expecting a guest who'd wandered into the wrong hallway. Instead, he froze. It was her. Hair swept back. A tailored blazer. Those same eyes, clear, intelligent, and now fixed directly on him. "You," he breathed, barely audible. Evelyn gave a soft smile. "Me?" Jake wiped his hands on his pants, suddenly too aware of the dirt, the sweat, the cheap thermos perched beside the panel. I didn't know if you—" "Remembered," she offered. He nodded. "I do," she said gently. "All of it." Silence pressed between them for a moment. Then Evelyn took a step closer. "I read your file," she said. "Saw your application. Your rejection." Jake's jaw tensed. "It's fine. I wasn't qualified. That's not the word I'd use." "You don't have to say anything," Jake replied, quickly uneasy. "I didn't do what I did because of your title. I didn't even know who you were." "I know," she said softly. "That's exactly why it matters." Jake shifted his weight. "Look, I'm just trying to do my job. That's all." "Is it?" Evelyn asked, tilting her head. Because from where I'm standing, you did more than a job. You saved a life. Mine. And then you walked away like it didn't mean anything. Jake's eyes dropped to the floor. It meant something he said quietly. It meant everything. But I'm not looking for a favor. Evelyn didn't flinch. Neither am I. I'm looking for people who make this place work. And I've realized we've built a system that rewards polish over substance, titles over integrity. That needs to change. Jake met her gaze then, and something passed between them. Acknowledgement, respect, the spark of something unspoken. I want to know more about what you do here, she said. The real work. Show me. Jake hesitated. You're serious. Dead serious, she said, then winced. Okay, maybe wrong phrasing. But yes. He cracked a reluctant smile, the first real one she'd seen on his face. Well, he said, grabbing the thermos. First thing you should know. Nothing in this building is ever actually fixed. We're just always buying time. I can work with that, Evelyn replied. As they disappeared down the hallway together, the stark divide between suits and overalls boardroom and boiler room began quietly to dissolve. And for the first time, both of them felt it. Something was changing. Not just policies, not just job titles, but something deeper. And it had started with an act of kindness neither of them saw coming. The hallways of Beacon Lux shimmered with quiet opulence. Golden sconces lined the walls like sentinels of elegance, their glow warm and intentional, just enough to make every guest feel like the star of their own story. But down a service corridor behind the East Wing ballroom, a flickering light bulb interrupted the illusion. It buzzed every few seconds, struggling against its own obsolescence. Jake stood beneath it on a metal stepladder, wrench in hand, shoulders tense from holding the same position for 20 minutes. His phone buzzed again on the floor next to him, and this time he cursed under his breath. He climbed down, checked the screen. Voicemail from the school. Again. Jake tapped the message and pressed the phone to his ear. Sophie's principal, calm and professional as always, informed him that his daughter had been held past dismissal due to a substitute bus driver mix-up. She was safe and waiting in the main office. Jake glanced at his watch. Already an hour past school end. He squeezed his eyes shut. It had been his biggest fear when applying for the day shift that he wouldn't be able to balance everything. And now, here he was running on caffeine and adrenaline, trying to keep elevators from shorting out while his daughter sat alone under fluorescent lights waiting for a ride that never came. He grabbed his bag and hurried toward the maintenance office where Miguel, his only real friend at work, sat eating chips straight from the bag. "Cover for me," Jake said, breathless. 15 minutes. Miguel looked up. "Kid, trouble." Jake nodded. Miguel didn't hesitate. "Go." Sophie sat curled in a too-big chair backpack at her feet, hugging a well-loved stuffed rabbit. She looked up when Jake rushed in, breath caught in his chest. "Hey, bug," he said softly. She didn't cry, didn't pout, just gave a small smile and reached for his hand. "Sorry, Dad. I didn't mean to stay so long." Jake knelt in front of her, brushing her hair back. "It's not your fault. I should have been there." She looked at him solemn. "You work really hard." The words hit harder than he expected. "I do," he said. "But I'm trying to fix that." Later that evening, Sophie sat cross-legged on a pile of old blankets inside the Beacon Lux basement utility room. She sipped cocoa from a styrofoam cup while drawing dinosaurs on the back of a discarded service log. Jake had managed to coax a space heater into life near the wall, and the faint hum filled the silence. He watched her from a distance while checking a faulty water pressure valve. Bringing her here hadn't been the plan, but childcare was thin, and she didn't want to go to the neighbors again. So he did what parents do when the world doesn't bend. He made space where there was none. A knock startled him. He turned and froze. Evelyn stood in the doorway holding a folder and a to-go bag. Her heels clicked softly on the tile as she stepped inside. "I brought the revised shift proposal," she began, then stopped, noticing Sophie. Jake moved quickly, blocking her view. "Sorry, she's just here for a little bit. won't be a distraction. Evelyn peered around him. Is this? Sophie, Jake stiffened. Yes, she's beautiful, Evelyn said, smiling gently. Hi there. Sophie looked up, blinking. Hi. Evelyn lowered herself to Sophie's level, mindful of her heels. I like your rabbit. Sophie offered it up. His name's Captain Crumbs. Evelyn chuckled. That's a strong name. I bet he's brave. He's very quiet, Sophie said. Well, quiet people can still be strong. Jake stood awkwardly, unsure how to bridge the moment. She won't be here long. I just needed to Jake, Evelyn said, rising. I'm not here to reprimand you. He nodded slowly. She handed him the folder. This is the modified position outline. A hybrid role, split shifts, flexible clock-ins, based on your feedback. Jake looked down at it, heart-thudding. You'd let me make my own hours. Within reason, she replied. So long as the work gets done, and I've seen enough to trust that it will. Jake stared at the pages, stunned. This doesn't usually happen, he said. I know, Evelyn replied, but it should. They stood in silence a beat longer than needed. Then Sophie called out, Dad, the light. Over there's flickering. Jake sighed. It's probably the ballast again. I'll fix it. Evelyn looked toward the corner. Do you mind if I help? Jake blinked. You want to fix a light? She shrugged. You said you wanted me to see the real work. He grabbed another step stool and handed her a pair of safety glasses. You ever used a screwdriver before I've managed a boardroom? How hard can this be? Minutes later, she stood on the stool, awkwardly holding the casing while Jake pointed at a wire. That's your ground. Don't touch that. Got it. Sophie watched them from her blanket fort, smiling. Are you guys friends now? She asked innocently. Evelyn looked down at Jake, then at Sophie. I hope so, she said. Jake didn't reply. But for the first time in a long time, something inside him loosened. Not just respect, but warmth. Connection. And under the hum of wires and the glow of repaired light, something began to shift, not just in the building, but in the space between them. Something quietly beautiful. Something like trust. The next morning, Evelyn sat at the head of a long oak conference table surrounded by the department heads of Beacon Lux. The room was all glass and angles perched on the top floor like a throne above the city. From here you could see bridges stretching across the river rooftops wrapped in morning fog. But Evelyn wasn't looking at the view. She was watching Russell Hines, who stood confidently at the far end, laser pointer in hand, presenting his weekly performance charts like a trial lawyer before a jury. And as you can see, Russell said, clicking to the next slide, maintenance response time dropped by 8% this quarter. We're below benchmark for 3 of our 4 sites. That trend reflects the inconsistency we see when underqualified staff are promoted into roles they're not equipped to handle. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. She could feel where this was going. The tone. The implication. Russell clicked again. Now I understand the push for internal development, but I want to caution against allowing sentiment to override standards. We've got policies in place for a reason. Evelyn steepled her fingers, her voice calm. Are you referring to a specific promotion? Mr. Hines Russell didn't flinch. I'm referring to the conversation about reclassifying part-time staff into supervisory hybrid roles. We need consistency, proven credentials, experience. Silence settled. Then Evelyn replied, steady and deliberate. I agree, Russell. We do need consistency, which is exactly why we need to reassess what qualifies as proven. She leaned forward. You know what else dropped in that same quarter, she asked? Guest complaints related to repair issues. Because even while working overtime understaffed and without benefits, our night techs have been keeping this building from falling apart. Russell blinked. Yes, but that's not the same as… It's not the same, she interrupted. It's more. It's hands-on problem-solving, emotional regulation in high-stress conditions, and… She paused, voice tightening slightly, the presence of mind to respond to emergency medical situations when no one else does. A few heads turned. Melanie, seated quietly beside her, gave a slow, approving nod. Russell cleared his throat. "I just think we should be careful about setting precedents." Evelyn smiled razor-sharp. "That's exactly what I intend to do. Set a new precedent." An hour later, Jake walked through the service corridor, toolbox in hand, completely unaware of the storm that had just rolled through the executive suite. He'd barely slept. His mind had been reeling all night about Evelyn offering him flexibility, about Sophie being forced to spend her evenings in utility rooms, about how the woman he'd once saved was now choosing to show up, again and again, not just as a boss, but as something else. A knock startled him as he reached his station. It was Russell, clipboard clutched tightly. "Got a job for you," Russell said, voice clipped. A pipe burst in the VIP suite. Jake frowned. "Upstairs, you heard me." Russell held out the order. "You'll be shadowed." Jake hesitated. Shadowed new policy. Russell said, not hiding his smirk. "Evaluation rounds. Got to make sure our more unconventional hires are up to company standard." Jake took the form, jaw clenched. He wasn't stupid. This wasn't about evaluation. It was about intimidation. The VIP suite was quiet when Jake arrived, high ceiling, soft, ambient lighting, and imported tile that looked like it cost more than his truck. The leak was behind the guest bathroom wall. He got to work silently aware of the figure watching from the doorway. Evelyn. She hadn't announced herself, but he knew it was her. He didn't turn, just kept tightening the valve. "You always this quiet when you work?" she asked. Jake exhaled. "Only when someone's trying to decide if I'm worth the risk." There was a pause. Then, "You're not a risk to me, Jake. You're a reminder." He turned finally. Of what she stepped into the room. No clipboard, no pretense. That everything I was taught to value degrees, suits, polish, none of it brought me back when I collapsed in that park. Her voice softened, but a man in a hoodie with scraped hands did. Jake looked away. "I'm not some hero, Evelyn. I was scared out of my mind. I almost didn't even know what to do." "But you did," she said. "That's the point." He stared at her, then something unspoken passing between them again, fragile as thread. Not romance, not yet, but recognition. Two people from different worlds meeting on a bridge of shared imperfection. Evelyn stepped closer. "Tell me what you'd change," she said. Jake blinked. "What in this place? If you had the chance. Don't filter. Don't defer. Just say it." Jake hesitated, then shrugged. "I'd stop treating maintenance like background noise. Give people full-time status if they're showing up like it. Pay for certification classes. Get rid of the culture where the guys with tools feel like they have to disappear when executives walk in." Evelyn's eyes didn't leave his. Noted. And she meant it. That night, Evelyn returned to her hotel suite. She stood at the window, staring down at the quiet hum of the city. She thought of her first year in business school, how she was taught to lead with numbers, never feelings. Yet, none of those metrics had saved her that morning in the park. A pair of rough hands had. She poured a glass of water, sat on the couch, and pulled out Jake's original application. It didn't list Ivy League schools or elite internships, but it had notes in the margin from HR, always punctual, never complains, works overtime when others refuse, polite, doesn't escalate conflicts. In short, the kind of employee who holds the whole place together quietly. Evelyn circled one line with her pen, then wrote 2 words in the margin beside it, rescue-worthy. Only this time, she was the one preparing to do the saving, not just of Jake's career, but of a system that had forgotten how to see the people holding it up. Jake stood at the kitchen counter, shoulders hunched, his hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The apartment was still. Sophie had fallen asleep on the couch with her sketch pad resting on her chest, her bunny tucked beneath her arm like a little talisman of safety. The television murmured quietly in the background, casting a gentle blue glow across the worn carpet. His eyes were fixed on the envelope in his hand. It wasn't bulky, just a few sheets of paper inside. But it felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Earlier that afternoon, Evelyn had slipped it to him after his shift ended. No grand announcement, no audience, just her and Jake standing in the alley behind the hotel where delivery trucks rumbled past and pigeons fought over breadcrumbs. "This is yours," she'd said simply. "Read it when you're ready." Now he wasn't sure he'd ever be. Jake peeled the flap back slowly, breath held. He unfolded the documents: a formal offer of employment, full-time salaried hybrid hours, health benefits, paid training for additional certifications, and the title Senior Facilities Supervisor. He blinked at the words. It didn't feel real, until he reached the end and saw her signature, Evelyn Hart, CEO, written in her sharp, deliberate hand. The mug slipped from his fingers and hit the sink with a thud. He rubbed his temples, overwhelmed by 1,000 tangled thoughts. This was everything he'd asked for, everything Sophie needed, a life raft in the middle of a sea he'd been treading for too long. So why was he hesitating? At dawn, he walked Sophie to school. She skipped alongside him, swinging her lunchbox, humming something from a cartoon he didn't recognize. The morning air was crisp, touched with the smell of wet leaves and coffee from the corner cart. "Dad," she asked halfway to the gate, "do you think I could ever be a boss like that lady with the nice shoes?" Jake smiled despite himself. "You mean Evelyn?" Sophie nodded. "She's really pretty. And she listens." Jake stopped walking. He looked down at his daughter, bright-eyed, hopeful, sharp as ever. "Yeah," he said quietly. "She does." Sophie tilted her head. "Are you gonna say yes?" Jake hesitated. To what he asked, testing her. "The new job. The one that lets you come to my class play. You keep thinking about it like your eyebrows are broken." Jake laughed, covering his mouth. "Yeah, I guess I do that." Sophie stepped closer and took his hand. "You don't have to be scared, Dad. You already saved her life. That's way harder than paperwork." He looked at her, his heart twisting. And that's when he realized what the fear really was, not about failing the job or stepping into something new. It was about being seen, truly seen, not just as a worker in the background, but as a man who mattered, a father trying his best, a person worthy of investment. That kind of visibility was exhilarating and terrifying. Later that day, Jake returned to Beacon Luck's contract in hand, throat tight. He passed the lobby with its marble and gold past the concierge, who finally nodded at him like he was more than just the maintenance guy, and headed toward the executive floor somewhere he'd never been, not once in all his years of working here. Evelyn's office was sleek modern. Glass walls, a low couch in the corner, a single-framed photo on her desk, her and a younger brother both in hiking boots grinning at the summit of some forgotten mountain. She stood when he entered. "I read it," Jake said, holding the contract. She didn't speak, just waited. He exhaled. "I want to say yes. I do. But I need to ask you something." "Of course." "Why me?" The question hung in the air. Evelyn crossed her arms, her voice soft but unwavering. "Because you've been doing more than your job for a long time and no one bothered to notice. Because you think like a leader, but carry yourself like a servant. Because when everything went wrong, your instinct was to act, not to ask who was watching." She paused. "And because Sophie deserves to see that people like her father are worth betting on." Jake swallowed hard. "That's a good answer," he said, voice thick. "Then let me ask you something," Evelyn said gently. "Why are you still afraid?" He looked down, flexing his fingers. "Because if I mess this up, it's not just me who falls." Evelyn stepped forward, reaching for the contract. "Then we build it so you don't have to carry the whole weight alone." Their eyes met. And in that moment, Jake realized that the offer she'd made wasn't just about a promotion or a paycheck. It was about trust. She was offering him a place in the story, not as a background character, but as someone who could help rewrite it. He took the pen she handed him and signed his name. That night at home he found Sophie drawing again. This time it was a hotel with a rainbow over it and 3 little stick figures beneath. One tall with a toolbox, one medium with heels, one small with a rabbit. Jake knelt beside her. "What's this one?" Sophie beamed. "That's you. That's the lady boss. And that's me. We all work at the hotel now." He stared at the page, warmth blooming in his chest like a light finally flicked on. "You know what he said? What I think that's my favorite picture yet." And for the first time in a very long time, Jake Miller felt like maybe he was exactly where he was meant to be. The clanging of metal pipes echoed through the basement hallway like distant thunder. Jake bent over a faulty valve, tightening a rusted coupling while sweat dripped from his brow. It was barely 10 a.m., and the new role, only 3 days old, already felt like wearing shoes 2 sizes too big. He'd been promoted. He had a title now. But most days it still felt like he was pretending, navigating meetings, juggling repairs, answering emails filled with acronyms he hadn't seen since high school. And today, things had gone wrong. Very wrong. He heard the elevator ding above him and knew without checking Russell had arrived. Jake cursed under his breath, wiped his hands on his jeans, and straightened just as the man himself strode into the mechanical room, expression smug and tight-lipped. Senior Facilities Supervisor Russell greeted voice-dripping sarcasm. "Nice title. Shame about the blacked-out East Wing." Jake flinched. "I'm working on it." "Are you?" Russell gestured sharply behind him. "Because half of our VIP guests just filed service complaints. Lights flickering, room temperatures fluctuating. That's not minor." Jake tried to keep his voice level. "It's a cascade fault. The building's wiring is outdated. If you want the full solution, we need to replace the relay junctions, not just patch them." "Ah," Russell smirked. "So the solution is spending thousands of dollars and weeks of downtime. Sounds like someone's angling to make excuses instead of taking responsibility." Jake's jaw tightened. "I'm not making excuses. I've logged every work order, and I've stayed overtime every night this week." Russell stepped closer. "Let me tell you what I see: someone who got bumped up because the CEO got sentimental, and now the system's cracking, just like I warned." Jake's hands clenched at his sides. His chest burned not just from anger but from the weight of every invisible pressure pressing down on him. Sophie's school tuition, the car's failing transmission, the look in Evelyn's eyes when she handed him that contract. "I'm doing everything I can," Jake said through gritted teeth. "Maybe everything you can just isn't enough," Russell shot back. For a beat, silence pulsed between them. Then Jake turned, walked past him and out into the hallway. He needed air. Real air. Not fluorescent lights and recycled HVAC frustration. He passed the lobby without looking at anyone, stepped out into the alley behind the building, and braced his hands on his knees. His mind spiraled. Maybe Russell's right. Maybe I don't belong here. Maybe this job was meant for someone with a degree, a resume, a polished suit, and the right vocabulary. Then he remembered Sophie's words. "You already saved her life. That's way harder than paperwork." But in this moment, it didn't feel like enough. Back upstairs, Evelyn scrolled through her inbox when Melanie rushed in. "There's an issue," she said, serious. What kind of issue? Russell cornered Jake downstairs. Words spreading staff are talking. Apparently, Russell implied Jake's promotion was a favor. Morale's shaking. Evelyn stood, fury tightening behind her ribs. "Where's Jake now?" "He left the floor. No one's seen him for 20 minutes. Evelyn grabbed her coat. "Clear, my next 2 hours." She found him near the loading dock, sitting on an overturned bucket behind a stack of cleaning supplies. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes on the pavement. She didn't speak right away, just stepped into the quiet with him. Finally, he looked up. "Should have known better than to think I could carry this." "You're not supposed to carry it alone," she said. He let out a bitter chuckle. "That's easy to say from your chair." Evelyn sat beside him, ignoring the dust and cold. "You think I haven't been called names behind my back. That I didn't hear people whisper that I only got this job because my father was a real estate legend. Jake turned to her surprised. My first month on the job, she continued, one of my regional VPs introduced me at a meeting and said, "This is our new CEO. Don't worry, she looks young, but she's got bite." Everyone laughed. I didn't. Jake's gaze dropped. "What did you do?" I rewrote every policy they used to keep quiet employees buried. Then I promoted the night shift janitor to daytime floor supervisor after I saw him de-escalate a panicked guest better than 3 managers combined. Jake snorted. "That sounds familiar." Evelyn smiled. "Jake, you didn't get this job because I owed you. You got it because you earned it. And yes, Russell's pushing back. He's scared. Of what? Of the fact that someone like you who leads with integrity and action challenges everything people like him hide behind." Jake stared ahead, brow furrowed. Evelyn reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I had HR pull the maintenance logs. Do you know how many issues you resolved last week?" He shrugged. 17. "Personally, including 3, no one else noticed." Jake blinked. "You didn't fail today. You exposed a weakness the system's been ignoring for years. And if you'll walk back in there with me, I'll make sure everyone knows that." He looked at her, something softening behind his eyes. "I don't want to fight. This isn't a fight," she said. "It's a shift." That afternoon, Evelyn called an all-staff meeting, something rarely done midweek. Employees filled the break room, curious, uneasy. Russell stood in the back, arms crossed. Jake stood near the door, unsure whether to step forward. Evelyn didn't wait. "I want to address the electrical outage," she said, "and I want to thank the man who identified a decades-old systems flaw and prevented a larger failure." She turned to Jake. Jake Miller didn't cause a breakdown. He caught one. And, starting next quarter, he'll lead a facilities modernization team to rebuild what should have been replaced years ago. Gasps, murmurs, then applause. Jake flushed, stunned. Melanie beamed. Russell turned pale. Evelyn met Jake's eyes as the room applauded louder. And for the first time since that morning in the park, he didn't feel like a man who'd merely survived something. He felt like someone who had changed something. The apartment was quiet that night. Not tired quiet or end-of-day quiet, but the kind that lingers after something big happens. A stillness wrapped in reflection. Jake sat on the couch, his dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar, the top button left open like a small rebellion against everything he'd carried all day. Sophie lay curled beside him, her head on his shoulder, a bedtime story resting forgotten in her lap. Outside the window, rain tapped gently against the glass, the city humming its lullaby of passing cars and distant voices. "I heard you clapped today," Sophie said softly. Jake looked down, smiling. "You heard Mr. Miguel texted me. Said you saved the building." Jake chuckled. "That's a bit dramatic." Sophie tilted her head. "But you fixed something important. I pointed out something broken. That's all. That's kind of the same." He paused. It wasn't about the lights or the outage. It was about the silence, the quiet neglect that came from years of looking at problems and thinking, "That's just the way it is." Jake had always fixed what he could reach. But now, for the first time, he had the tools and the authority to fix what others had chosen to ignore. Sophie stirred beside him, then sat up, cross-legged, her face serious in the dim light. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." She toyed with the edge of her sleeve. "Do you ever wish you hadn't helped that lady in the park?" The question caught him off guard. He blinked. "What I mean?" Sophie hesitated, struggling to shape the thought. "If you didn't help her, maybe none of this would have happened. You wouldn't be so busy now. You wouldn't be working late or getting in trouble with mean guys like Mr. Russell. You wouldn't be so tired." Jake stared at her, then gently reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Sophie," he said, "I've never not for 1 second regretted helping her." "But what if everything gets too hard?" she asked. "What if people don't like you being the boss? What if it all goes back to how it was before? Jake thought for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly, speaking with the kind of quiet certainty only a father can manage. If I hadn't helped her, he said, I might have kept my head down forever. I might have told myself I didn't matter, that showing up was enough. But that moment, it reminded me that doing the right thing, even when no one's watching, still changes the world. Sophie looked at him with wide eyes. Even if the world's really big? He smiled, especially then. They sat like that for a while, her head resting on his chest again, his hand gently stroking her hair. The TV flickered in silence, a paused screensaver casting soft colors on the walls. Eventually she murmured, I think she was meant to fall near you, Dad. He swallowed against the lump in his throat. Maybe I was meant to be there for her. The next morning, Jake arrived early, too early, even for a maintenance supervisor. The lobby was still waking up, lights flickering on one by one, front desk yawning behind smiles, fresh flowers arriving from the delivery truck. He walked the halls slowly, not with the anxiety of a man out of place, but the steady gaze of someone who finally owned his purpose. Evelyn was already in her office reviewing project timelines for the facility's modernization task force. She looked up as he knocked on the glass wall. You're early, she said, standing. Couldn't sleep. She gestured for him to come in. Jake sat, pulling a folded paper from his jacket pocket. This is a blueprint I drew up last night. Just ideas for emergency protocols. Clearer signage in the stairwells, maybe some bilingual notices. I figured if we're going to do this right, we should start from the ground up. Evelyn studied the sketch. Hand-drawn, neat block letters, little notes in the margins. Thoughtful. Real. I like it, she said. It's human. Practical. Jake shrugged. That's how I think. Don't change that, she said softly. I've sat through enough presentations with buzzwords and pivot strategies. I'd rather work with someone who understands what it's like when a wire fails at midnight. Jake smiled faintly. Appreciate that. They were quiet for a moment. Then Evelyn leaned against her desk. I've been thinking about something she said. You helped me when I was vulnerable. Not because you wanted anything, but because it was right. He nodded slowly. Well, now it's my turn to help you do the same for others, she said. This modernization plan. It's not just wires and panels. It's dignity. And I want you to lead it. Jake blinked. You want me to form a team, train them, work with HR, build a new standard for how this place treats the people who keep it running. He stared at her, heart thudding. And if I mess up, he asked, voice raw. Evelyn smiled. Then we fix it, like everything else. That afternoon, Jake passed Russell in the hallway. The man looked away first. He didn't smirk, didn't speak. Jake didn't need him to. He had something better than approval. He had a daughter who believed in him. A boss who backed him. A job that reflected the man he'd become. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a janitor patching leaks in the dark. He felt like a builder, of systems, of second chances, of something that might finally last. The staff lounge buzzed with low conversation as Jake stepped inside, holding a folder thick with schematics and hand-drawn notes. A whiteboard behind him listed tasks for the week, some scribbled in sharp black marker, others already crossed out. The room was busier than usual, the air charged with something between curiosity and hope. A few weeks ago, no one would have expected the hotel's facilities staff to be gathering for anything more than coffee and quick instructions. Today, they had a meeting with the CEO. Evelyn Hart stood by the far window, coffee in hand sleeves rolled up. No blazer, no assistant shadowing her, no pretense. She looked comfortable, present. Miguel leaned toward Jake. You sure she's serious about all this? Jake offered a half smile. You've met her, haven't you? Miguel chuckled. Good point. Evelyn turned, signaling for the room's attention. The hum quieted instantly. Thanks for showing up, she began. I know it's not every day corporate invites you to speak freely. And I know it's not always easy to believe when leadership says, we're listening. But I'm here to tell you, we are." She paused, glancing around the room. "We've been running this hotel on outdated equipment and outdated thinking. Both need to change. So today isn't about presentations, it's about perspective. I want to hear what's really happening behind the walls, what you need, what's broken." For a beat, no one spoke. Then one hand rose. It was Carla, an HVAC tech who'd worked there for 9 years. Her voice was firm. "We need tools that aren't 20 years old. We spend half our time trying to fix our equipment just so we can start fixing the real problems." Another tech chimed in. "We've been patching insulation with duct tape." Someone else. "The supply room leaks every time it rains." Evelyn nodded, jotting things down on a notepad. She didn't interrupt. She didn't deflect. She absorbed. Jake watched from the back, his chest swelling not just with pride, but with something deeper validation. This is how it should be, he thought. This is how dignity starts by listening. Then Evelyn turned to Jake. "Jake," she said, "you've been here the longest. You've seen this place at its worst. What would you change if you had no restrictions?" Jake stepped forward, clearing his throat. "I'd build a culture where no one feels invisible," he said, "where maintenance isn't treated like a background process but part of the experience. Guests don't see us, but they feel what we do. Every light that works, every door that opens, every emergency that doesn't happen, that's because of this team. We deserve to be more than a line item on a spreadsheet." The room went quiet. Evelyn's eyes shimmered, but she blinked it back and smiled. That's the kind of answer that rewrites handbooks. She stepped forward and pulled a folded sheet from her pocket. "This," she said, "is a signed executive order. Starting next quarter, we're increasing our facilities budget by 40%. We're implementing paid training for certifications, scheduling quarterly wellness reviews, and restructuring internal promotion pathways so you don't need a business degree to move up, you just need integrity and proof of impact." A gasp rippled through the room. But Evelyn wasn't done. "And we're retiring the old staff evaluation format, replacing it with something we'll co-design with your input. Because who better to shape how success is measured than the ones delivering it?" For a moment, no one moved. Then someone clapped. Then another. And then the room erupted applause, echoing against the walls like thunder. Not polite, not obligatory, but earned. Jake looked at Evelyn. And that's when he saw it. A single tear. She turned slightly, brushing it away as if it didn't belong. But it did. And Jake knew it wasn't just the moment getting to her, it was the journey. From collapse to transformation. From being saved to leading with intention. After the meeting, as the room slowly emptied, Evelyn stepped outside for air. Jake followed. They stood side by side overlooking the small courtyard beyond the loading dock. Light rain sprinkled the bricks. "You cried in there," Jake said gently. Evelyn didn't deny it. "I did." Jake looked at her sideways. "Didn't think CEOs were allowed to do that." Evelyn chuckled. "They're not. But I stopped caring about aloud the day a man with grease on his face knelt in the mud and brought me back to life." They were quiet for a long moment. Then Evelyn turned to him, voice soft. "You know, that day when I woke up in the park, I didn't remember my title, or the company, or what flight I'd missed. I just remembered the sound of your voice counting, willing me back. That's what stayed." Jake didn't know what to say, so he said the only thing he could. "I'm glad you stayed." She met his eyes, the air between them humming with something unspoken. Not romance, not yet, but something that looked a lot like trust. A future forming not out of convenience but of respect and shared ground. "I meant what I said," she added, her voice stronger now. "You didn't just catch a failing wire that day, you caught me, and now I want to help build something that catches others before they fall." Jake nodded, the weight in his chest finally easing. "Then let's build it." And just like that, with rain falling softly around them and the echoes of applause still lingering in the walls, two people who had once been strangers separated by job titles Social expectations and sheer chance began to walk forward as equals, not because of contracts, not because of obligation, but because sometimes the right people meet in the most unexpected ways and refuse to let go. It was just past sunrise when Jake and Sophie arrived at Tanglewood Park, the same park, the one with the winding trail, the old sycamores, the quiet spot where months ago a jogger collapsed and a single act of instinct had changed the course of not just one life, but two. Now the path was washed in golden light. Autumn leaves fluttered across the ground like blessings scattered by the wind. Jake held a thermos of coffee in one hand, Sophie's hand in the other. She wore her favorite blue coat and a paper crown she'd made in class for Hero Day. "I told them my dad's the best kind of hero," Sophie said, swinging their hands. "The kind who fixes stuff. Not just machines, but people too." Jake chuckled. "That's a pretty high bar, kiddo." "You met it," she said simply. They turned the bend, and there she was. Evelyn stood beneath a tree hair down scarf fluttering in the breeze. In her hands, she held a folded picnic blanket and a bag of muffins she'd insisted on baking herself. She waved when she saw them. Jake felt something quiet bloom in his chest, not the pounding adrenaline of CPR, not the weight of stress or doubt, but peace. Earned. Lived. Real. They greeted one another the way people do when words have long since been replaced by trust. Evelyn knelt to hug Sophie, then handed her a blueberry muffin the size of her fist. "Baked from scratch," she said proudly. Sophie took a bite and nodded approvingly, cheeks full. "You could open a bakery." "Don't tempt me," Evelyn said, laughing. They laid the blanket down near the edge of the hill where they could see the city waking in the distance, rooftops catching light windows blinking on lives unfolding. Jake sipped his coffee and leaned back on one arm. "It's strange," he said. "I walk this trail almost every week, but I never stop here." Evelyn glanced at him. "Why not?" He shrugged. "Felt like I was always running to or from something." She nodded slowly. And now Jake looked around the quiet, the peace his daughter playing with fallen leaves, her laughter bright against the morning stillness. "Now, I think, maybe I've arrived." Evelyn didn't say anything. She reached for his hand. There was no fanfare, no grand declaration. Just two people sitting in the stillness of a second chance at work, at life, at love. The kind of second chance you don't chase, but receive. The kind you only recognize when you've lost something first. Back at the hotel, the change was palpable. The facilities team had a renovated workspace complete with ergonomic stations and natural lighting. The staff now wore name badges with not just their positions but a line beneath that read, "Team Member," "Culture Builder," "Backbone." Guests noticed. Reviews improved. But more importantly, morale soared. Jake oversaw the new mentorship program pairing experienced technicians with younger hires. His evenings were spent with Sophie attending her school play, helping her build solar system models out of papier-mâché. Evelyn continued leading not from a pedestal, but from the ground. She walked the hallways daily, asked for names, listened for real answers. She cried less, but when she did, it wasn't from pain. It was from joy, fulfillment, and sometimes from disbelief that a fall on a cold morning had become the foundation of something lasting. One evening in late winter, Jake returned home to find Sophie sitting at the kitchen table writing something with intense concentration. She looked up and beamed. "I'm writing a story for school," she said. "It's called The Man Who Brought People Back to Life." Jake smiled, hanging up his jacket. "Sounds like science fiction." She shook her head. "It's not. It's about you." He froze. "Because you didn't just bring her back," Sophie said softly. "You brought you back. And me too." Jake sat across from her, heart full. "I don't know what to say to that," he murmured. "Just keep being you," she replied, simple as breath. A few weeks later, Evelyn invited Jake and Sophie to a ribbon-cutting ceremony for the newly renamed building annex. They thought it would be something small. It wasn't. Banners waved, staff gathered, Reporters snapped photos. And then Evelyn stepped forward and pulled away the black cloth covering the new bronze plaque. The Miller Wing. Dedicated to resilience, humility, and the quiet heroes who make everything work. Jake stared at the name. His name. Tears stung his eyes. I didn't know he whispered. Evelyn took his hand. You never asked for recognition, she said, which is exactly why you deserve it. Sophie stood beside them, holding his other hand. She looked up and whispered, Told you. Hero. As the crowd dispersed and the sunlight dipped behind the rooftops, Jake stood at the edge of the plaza watching the name gleam in the fading light. He thought back to the morning of the park. The moment he ran. The breath he gave. The hand he held. And how it had all come back to him in ways he could never have imagined. Not just a job, not just a second chance, but a purpose, a partnership, a life. And in that golden hour glow he finally understood. Sometimes it's not the breath you take that saves you, it's the one you give.